When a racist cop spat on a black woman in a shocking act of racism, he believed there would be no consequences. But he had no idea she wasn't just any woman. You will be shocked to see how the tables turn. It was a sweltering summer afternoon in Jackson Heights, a small southern town with deep roots and even deeper divides. The air hung heavy with the smell of freshly cut grass and sizzling barbecue from a nearby park. Amid the lively sounds of children laughing and the distant hum of traffic, an unsettling scene began to unfold on the corner of Main Street. Vanessa Carter, a poised and well-spoken black woman in her late 30s, stood next to her car parked on the side of the road. Dressed in professional attire, a sleek navy blazer and matching trousers, she had just returned from a community outreach event aimed at fostering stronger ties between the local police department and residents. With a warm smile and genuine dedication, she had spent her day speaking to groups about trust, respect, and justice, principles she lived by. But now, all of that felt like a cruel joke. As Vanessa reached into her car to grab a folder, flashing blue lights reflected in her rearview mirror, she turned to see a police cruiser pulling up behind her. A white officer, stocky with an air of authority, stepped out. His expression was already hardened, and his movements were brisk. His name tag read, Officer Peterson. Vanessa took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had encountered prejudice before, but she never let it rattle her. Keeping her hands visible, she stepped away from the car. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked calmly. Peterson's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "License and registration," he barked, his tone laced with impatience. Vanessa nodded and moved to retrieve the documents from her car. As she did, Peterson stepped closer, his hand resting on his holster. "Move slower," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through the tense silence. "Don't make any sudden moves." She paused, her heart pounding but her demeanor unshaken. "I'm just getting my documents, sir," she replied, her voice firm but respectful. The interaction quickly escalated. Peterson's attitude grew more hostile with every passing moment. He accused her of parking illegally, then suggested her car looked suspicious. The more Vanessa tried to explain, the more dismissive he became. His words were sharp, his tone dripping with disdain. Finally, as if to make a point, Peterson stepped closer. His voice dropped to a low, mocking tone. "People like you think you can just do whatever you want, don't you?" he said, his words hanging in the humid air. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. "People like me?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Peterson smirked. "Yeah, you heard me." And then, without warning, he spat. The saliva landed on Vanessa's cheek, warm and wet, a vile act of disrespect that sent shockwaves through her body. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. She stood frozen, her mind racing to process what had just happened. Around her, a small group of bystanders began to gather, murmurs of disbelief and outrage rippling through the crowd. Vanessa wiped her cheek with trembling hands, her face a mixture of shock, hurt, and quiet fury. But she didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply locked eyes with Peterson, her gaze steady and unyielding. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice cutting through the thick silence like a blade. Peterson laughed, a hollow, mocking sound. "You think you're something special, huh?" he sneered, turning back toward his cruiser. Vanessa stood there, motionless, watching him retreat. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but she kept her composure. Deep down, she knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As she climbed back into her car, the murmurs of the crowd faded into the background. Vanessa didn't speak a word as she drove away, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. But her mind was already at work, piecing together a plan. This wasn't the first time she'd faced injustice, but it might just be the last time someone like Officer Peterson got away with it. The next morning, the town of Jackson Heights woke up to an unexpected storm. Not the kind that rolled in with thunderclouds, but the kind that shook a community to its core. By the time Vanessa Carter arrived at City Hall for her early meeting, whispers of the previous day's incident had already spread like wildfire. Videos captured by bystanders were making the rounds on social media. Though the footage wasn't crystal clear, it was enough to show Officer Peterson's aggressive posture, the heated exchange, and, most damning of all, the moment he spat on Vanessa. Inside her office, Vanessa sat at her desk, her hands resting on a pristine white folder filled with documents. Her face remained calm, but her mind buzzed with thoughts and emotions she was still trying to untangle. The humiliation of the previous day was still fresh, but she knew anger alone wouldn't fix what had happened. She was no stranger to the long battle for justice. She'd faced uphill climbs before. A knock at her door broke her train of thought. "Come in," she said. The door creaked open, and in walked her assistant, Clara, a young and eager staffer who always carried a mix of nervous energy and admiration for Vanessa. But today, Clara's usual bright demeanor was replaced with unease. "Ms. Carter," Clara began, holding up her phone. "You need to see this." Vanessa took the phone and played the video. As she watched, her jaw tightened. The comments below the video varied. Some expressed outrage, others disbelief, and a few made excuses for Peterson's actions. "This is already on every platform," Clara said, her voice trembling. "People are furious, but there's also backlash. Some are defending him, saying you provoked it." Vanessa placed the phone down carefully and looked up at Clara. "They'll say anything to protect their own," she replied, her voice steady. "But this isn't just about me, Clara. This is about all the people who've been treated this way and never had a chance to speak up." Clara nodded, her admiration for Vanessa growing by the second. "What's our next step?" she asked. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her mind already racing through possibilities. "For now, we wait," she said. "Sometimes the loudest move is saying nothing and letting the truth come to light on its own." Across town, Officer Peterson sat in the precinct break room, his feet propped up on a table as he scrolled through his phone. A smirk danced across his face as he watched the same video Clara had shown Vanessa. "Can you believe this?" he scoffed to another officer sitting nearby. "They're making me out to be the villain. She started it, acting all high and mighty." The other officer, clearly uncomfortable, avoided eye contact. "I don't know, man. This looks bad. Real bad." Peterson waved him off. "Please, what's she going to do? File a complaint? These people always want attention. She's probably loving this." His arrogance was palpable, but cracks were beginning to show. As the morning progressed, more officers started whispering about the video. The precinct captain called Peterson into his office, his face grave. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Peterson," the captain said, holding up a tablet displaying the viral footage. "This is making the department look terrible." Peterson shrugged. "She was asking for it, Captain. I don't see the big deal." The captain's face darkened. "You don't see the big deal?" he repeated, his voice rising. "The mayor's office has already called, and they're not happy. The media's sniffing around, and people are demanding accountability. I've got half a mind to suspend you right now." Peterson leaned forward, his confidence faltering. "Suspend me? For what? Some overblown video? For conduct unbecoming of an officer," the captain shot back. "You've crossed a line, Peterson, and it's going to cost you." Peterson left the office fuming, but he was still convinced this would blow over. He had no idea what was coming next. Back at her office, Vanessa received a call from a local journalist. "Miss Carter, can we get a comment on the incident with Officer Peterson?" Vanessa took a breath before responding. "I have no comment at this time," she said calmly, her voice betraying no emotion. The journalist pushed. "Do you plan to press charges or take any legal action?" Vanessa's lips curved into a faint smile. "All I can say is that I believe in accountability. Thank you for reaching out." As she hung up the phone, Vanessa stared out the window at the bustling city below. The people she had dedicated her life to protecting deserved more than empty words and hollow promises. They deserved action. This wasn't just about her. This was about dismantling a system that allowed people like Peterson to act with impunity. And as far as she was concerned, the next move was hers to make. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jackson Heights as Vanessa Carter stepped out of her office. Her calm demeanor masked the fire burning within her. She had spent the morning consulting with her closest confidants, including a trusted legal advisor and a handful of community leaders. Now, it was time to act. As Vanessa walked toward the community center where a scheduled town hall was about to take place, her phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages. The video of her encounter with Officer Peterson had reached over 1 million views, sparking heated debates online. Some demanded immediate action against Peterson, while others blamed Vanessa, attempting to paint her as the aggressor. Vanessa ignored the noise. She had long ago learned that public opinion could be fleeting and divisive. What mattered now was truth and justice, not just for herself but for the countless others whose voices had been silenced. The community center buzzed with activity. Rows of chairs filled quickly as people from all walks of life gathered, eager to hear Vanessa speak. Some came in solidarity, their faces etched with concern and empathy. Others came out of curiosity, unsure of where they stood, but wanting to witness the unfolding events. As Vanessa stepped onto the small stage, the murmurs in the room quieted. Her presence commanded respect, not through intimidation, but through the quiet strength that radiated from her. She stood behind the podium, taking a moment to scan the room before speaking. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Yesterday, I experienced something I wish I could say was unique. A blatant act of racism and disrespect at the hands of someone sworn to protect us." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Vanessa held up her hand, silencing them. "I'm not here to relive that moment," she continued, "but to remind us all that what happened isn't just about me. It's about a system that allows behavior like this to go unchecked. It's about the countless people who endure the same or worse but never get the chance to fight back." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But I'm not here to be a victim. I'm here to take action. We've seen enough of the excuses, the cover-ups, and the 'it's just one bad apple' speeches. It's time for accountability. It's time for change." The room erupted into applause, a wave of support and determination washing over the crowd. Vanessa's words carried the weight of someone who had spent years fighting battles others couldn't see, and her resolve was contagious. As the applause died down, Vanessa leaned forward, her tone sharpening. "I want to let you all in on something," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "As of next week, I'll be stepping into a new role as the Chief of Police for Jackson Heights." Gasps filled the room, followed by another wave of applause and cheers. The announcement was as shocking as it was inspiring. Vanessa had kept her appointment quiet, knowing the impact it would have in a town still grappling with its history of racial tensions. "Let me be clear," she continued, her voice rising with conviction. "I didn't take this position to sit behind a desk. I took it because I believe in holding people accountable, starting with the very officer who thought he could humiliate me without consequences." Her words hung in the air like a promise. The crowd erupted again, many standing to their feet in a show of support. Meanwhile, at the precinct, the news of Vanessa's appointment hit like a thunderclap. Officers gathered in hushed clusters, their faces a mix of shock and apprehension. Peterson, who had spent the day arrogantly brushing off the controversy, now sat frozen at his desk, staring at his phone. "What's the big deal?" he muttered to himself, trying to mask the unease creeping into his voice. "She's just another paper pusher." But deep down, he knew better. The headlines circulating online were clear. Vanessa Carter wasn't just another appointment. She was coming to make changes, and his name was already at the center of her first battle. That evening, back in the quiet of her home, Vanessa sat at her kitchen table, staring at a folder marked with the Jackson Heights Police Department logo. Inside were documents outlining the disciplinary history of every officer under her soon-to-be command. Peterson's name appeared multiple times, each entry more troubling than the last. As she flipped through the pages, her mind wandered back to the incident. She could still feel the sting of his spit on her cheek, the mocking tone of his voice. But instead of anger, she felt clarity. This wasn't about retaliation. It was about building a department that the community could trust, a department that didn't tolerate hate or abuse of power. She closed the folder and exhaled deeply. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself, her voice steady with determination. The morning of Vanessa Carter's first day as Chief of Police arrived with a crisp chill in the air. The sun had barely risen when she pulled into the parking lot of the Jackson Heights Police Department. She paused for a moment, gazing at the building she had entered countless times before, always as an outsider, always as someone who had to prove her worth tenfold. But today was different. Today, she walked through those doors as the leader of the very institution that had long ignored the voices of people like her. Vanessa adjusted her badge, the weight of its symbolism settling over her. This wasn't just a job. It was an opportunity to redefine what justice and accountability looked like in Jackson Heights. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was charged. Officers milled about, pretending to carry on with their routines, but their furtive glances toward the door betrayed their nerves. News of Vanessa's appointment had been the talk of the station for days, and everyone knew her arrival meant change. Officer Peterson sat at his desk, his usual smugness replaced by a simmering discomfort. He hadn't slept well since the town hall announcement, and the uneasy whispers among his colleagues did little to calm his nerves. When Vanessa walked in, every conversation in the room died. She strode with purpose, her head held high, and her sharp gaze swept across the room. A few officers nodded respectfully. Others avoided her eyes, unsure of where they stood. Vanessa made her way to the center of the room and turned to face the gathered officers. She spoke with calm authority, her voice carrying a weight that silenced any remaining murmurs. "Good morning," she began. "As you all know, I'm Vanessa Carter, your new chief of police. I won't waste time with a long speech because actions matter more than words. But let me be clear. This department is about to change. Accountability, respect, and fairness will no longer be optional. They will be required." Her words were met with a mix of quiet nods and uneasy shifting. Vanessa scanned the room, her eyes finally landing on Peterson. His jaw was set, his arms crossed, but his discomfort was evident. "I've already begun reviewing personnel files," Vanessa continued. "I'm well aware of the challenges we face and the behaviors that have gone unchecked for far too long. That ends now." Peterson's face turned red, his eyes darting around the room. Vanessa paused, letting her words sink in. "If anyone here believes they are above the law or immune to accountability, let me assure you, they are mistaken." Shortly after her address, Vanessa summoned Peterson to her office. The tension was palpable as he entered, his posture stiff and defensive. Vanessa sat behind her desk, her demeanor calm but commanding. "Officer Peterson," she began, gesturing for him to sit. "I trust you know why you're here." He hesitated before sitting, his eyes narrowing. "If this is about that video, Chief Carter, I've already explained." Vanessa held up a hand, cutting him off. "This isn't a debate, Peterson. I've reviewed the video, the reports, and your file. This meeting is about holding you accountable for your actions." Peterson leaned forward, his voice rising. "With all due respect, Chief, that video was taken out of context. People are making it a bigger deal than it is." Vanessa's expression didn't waver. "Spitting on a civilian is not a small deal. It's an act of disrespect, aggression, and frankly, racism. And it's not the first time your behavior has been called into question." She opened a folder on her desk, pulling out a stack of documents. "Multiple complaints, excessive force, inappropriate language. Do you see a pattern here, Peterson?" He shifted uncomfortably, his bravado crumbling. "Those complaints were exaggerated," he muttered. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice steady but sharp. "Let me make this clear. The culture that allowed you to act this way is over. I will not tolerate racism, abuse of power, or any behavior that undermines the trust between this department and the community we serve." Peterson sat in stunned silence as Vanessa continued. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full investigation. During this time, you will be required to complete bias training and participate in community service. The decision regarding your future with this department will depend on your willingness to take responsibility and change." He opened his mouth to protest, but Vanessa cut him off. "This isn't up for discussion." Dismissed. Word of Peterson's suspension spread quickly through the precinct. Some officers grumbled about the decision, but others quietly applauded Vanessa's resolve. Later that day, Vanessa met with community leaders, reassuring them that changes were underway. She outlined her plans for increased transparency, improved training, and stronger accountability measures. "It won't happen overnight," she told the group, "but I promise you, this department will become one that serves every member of this community with respect and fairness." Her words were met with applause, a glimmer of hope flickering in a town long divided by mistrust. At home, Peterson sat alone, replaying the events of the day in his mind. For the first time, he was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. The smug confidence he once carried was replaced by a gnawing sense of regret. He opened his laptop, scrolling through the comments on the viral video. The harsh criticism and calls for accountability were impossible to ignore. For the first time, he began to wonder if he had been wrong, not just in this incident, but in the way he had carried himself for years. Weeks passed, and the atmosphere in Jackson Heights began to shift. Under Vanessa Carter's leadership, the police department embarked on a path of reform that many had believed impossible. What had started as an incident of vile racism was now becoming a catalyst for long overdue change. Officer Peterson's suspension wasn't just a punishment. It became a moment of reckoning for him. Forced to attend mandatory bias training and complete hours of community service in underserved neighborhoods, Peterson found himself face to face with the very people he had once dismissed. One afternoon, as he helped serve meals at a local shelter, a young boy approached him. "Are you the officer from that video?" the boy asked, his innocent eyes filled with curiosity. Peterson hesitated, shame washing over him. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "My mum said you did something bad," the boy continued, "but everyone deserves a second chance if they try to do better. Are you trying to be better?" The boy's question hit him harder than any lecture ever could. For the first time, Peterson began to reflect deeply on the choices that had brought him to this point. The arrogance, the entitlement, the unchecked prejudice, it all felt like a weight he could no longer carry. Meanwhile, Vanessa worked tirelessly to implement sweeping changes in the department. She introduced mandatory cultural sensitivity training, updated policies on the use of force, and established a community advisory board to ensure transparency. One of her most impactful decisions was to create a program that paired officers with local residents for monthly community building sessions. These meetings allowed officers to hear directly from the people they served, fostering understanding and empathy on both sides. One such session saw a particularly poignant moment. An older black woman stood up and spoke directly to a group of officers. "We don't hate you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We just want you to see us as people, not as threats." The room fell silent. Officers who had once dismissed such sentiments as overblown now listened intently, some even wiping away tears. Vanessa, standing at the back of the room, felt a swell of hope. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had taken this job. The changes in the police department didn't go unnoticed. Local media outlets began reporting on the positive developments, and community members expressed cautious optimism. Protests that had once filled the streets turned into town hall meetings, where people voiced their concerns and saw their voices reflected in real action. Vanessa's leadership extended beyond policy changes. She took time to visit schools, churches, and local businesses, ensuring that every corner of the town felt seen and heard. Her presence wasn't just symbolic, it was transformative. "I've never felt safer," one resident said during a news interview. "Not because the problems are gone, but because we finally have someone who's willing to face them head-on." Months later, Peterson requested a private meeting with Vanessa. When he entered her office, he was a changed man. Gone was the swagger and arrogance. In its place was a humbled individual. "Chief Carter," he began, his voice steady but subdued. "I wanted to apologize. Not just for what I did to you, but for how I've treated people my entire career. I didn't see it before, but now I understand the damage I've caused. I want to make it right." Vanessa studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step, Peterson. The real question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I want to help," he said earnestly. "I want to be part of the change you're building here. If you'll let me, I'd like to earn back the trust I've lost." Vanessa nodded slowly. Actions speak louder than words. Let's see what you can do. From that day forward, Peterson dedicated himself to becoming an ally in the fight for equity and justice. He worked to rebuild trust within the community, becoming one of the most vocal advocates for the changes Vanessa had implemented. 1 year after her appointment, Vanessa stood at a podium outside the precinct, addressing a crowd gathered for a community celebration. The police department had made measurable strides in rebuilding its relationship with the town, and the atmosphere was one of cautious optimism. "Today isn't about me," Vanessa said, her voice ringing clear. "It's about us, all of us. Change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens when we come together, when we listen to each other, and when we hold ourselves accountable. Jackson Heights is proof that even in the face of hate, we can choose progress." The crowd erupted into applause, a sea of hope and unity. Among them stood Peterson, clapping with genuine pride. As Vanessa stepped down from the podium, a young girl approached her, holding out a bouquet of flowers. "Thank you for making our town better," the girl said shyly. Vanessa knelt to accept the flowers, her eyes glistening. "Thank you for believing we could," she replied. Vanessa's journey from victim to leader was more than a personal triumph. It was a testament to the power of resilience, accountability, and the belief that even the most broken systems can be rebuilt when people are willing to face the truth.